Hello, welcome to Relentless Truth Media. My name is Ryan Campbell, and in this video, we're going to be covering one of the most debated prophecies in all the Bible, which is found in Revelation chapter 17. And this is regarding the seven kings. And the verse we're looking at is Revelation 17:10. It says, "And there are seven kings, 5 are fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space." Now, there's been all kinds of interpretations regarding the identity of these seven kings. But hopefully when you hear this interpretation, you'll see why it's so powerful and why it's so clear. And I'm going to do my best to make it easy to understand. Now, the foundation for interpreting this prophecy is the book of Daniel. But more specifically, there's something in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, that kind of unlocks the prophecy. And I'm going to be teaching as if you have some sort of basic knowledge about Bible prophecy. But if you don't, if you're not familiar with some of these prophecies in Daniel and Revelation that we're talking about, don't worry, you'll still be able to understand the overall message of the video. Now, in Revelation 17, you have a harlot that is riding a beast. Now, in Bible prophecy, a woman represents a church or God's people. We know that because in Revelation, the church is called the bride of Christ. And in Matthew 25, Jesus gives a parable about 10 virgins that represented his people. So a pure woman represents God's people. And this harlot represents an apostate church or counterfeit Christianity, people that are being unfaithful. They claim the name of Jesus, but they're being unfaithful to Jesus. In the Old Testament, when Israel would break God's commandments, he would call them a harlot because they had his name, but they were breaking his commandments. Now, the angel tells John, "I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carrieth her." And then he does that by explaining the seven kings. So really, to fully understand the woman, you need to know the identity of those seven kings. And then more specifically, who is the fifth, sixth, and the seventh king? And really the seventh king, by the time we get there, that really helps you fully understand this. Now, the focus of Revelation 17 is it does cover, there's an application to the dark ages, but the primary application is really for the end of time. And we'll talk about the different applications in this video. Now, the beast that the woman is sitting on represents the secular powers or the state. Now, we get that, the meaning of that symbol in Daniel chapter 7 tells us that a beast is a kingdom or a nation. So it represents the secular powers. So the symbol of the woman riding the beast, it really represents the union of church and state. And this is the one world religion and one world government at the end of time. And this is something that is worldwide. It's not something that's just in America. This is what we would call, many call the New World Order. Now, the most people, they usually stop right there. They just figure out the woman and the beast and they stop, but there's more to it than that. And so I want us to look at the details of the beast. So in Revelation 17, the angel says to John, "Why do you marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and the beast that carrieth her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell in the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is." So what we want to identify are the 7 heads, or is also called 7 kings. And more specifically, who is the 7th head or the 7th king on this beast? Now, the Bible says, "Here is the mind which has wisdom. Now, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth." Okay, so the woman is in Revelation 17, she's riding a beast with 7 heads, which are 7 mountains, and the same as 7 kings. So let me say, that's kind of confusing, so let me say it this way. The 7 heads, the 7 mountains, and the 7 kings are really all talking about the same thing. It's just saying it in different ways. It's the same thing, but it's using different symbols. And then it says, here is the mind which has wisdom. Now, the wisdom here refers to spiritual insight to understand the 7 heads. You need spiritual discernment rather than human intelligence. And this is the same kind of wisdom that Daniel got for being faithful to God. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel was faithful and he became 10 times wiser than the rest of his peers. Now, the 7 mountains here, they stand for 7 successive world powers that Satan has used to oppress God's people. Okay, the mountains are a symbol for kingdoms. And so let me give you some examples how we know that. In Daniel chapter 2, you got the statue, and the stone hits the statue, breaks the statue, and that stone becomes a great mountain. That actually represents the coming kingdom of Christ. Then in Revelation 14, you have the kingdom of Christ represented by Mount Zion. They're actually, in Revelation, there are 2 major mountains at the end of time. You got God's mountain, which is Mount Zion. And then you have a counterfeit of that mountain called Mount Megiddo. In the Hebrew word is Armageddon. And Armageddon, that's what it means. It's a Hebrew word. It's a compound word made up of 2 words. And the word is Har Megiddo or Megiddo. And that really means Mount Megiddo, or some say Mount Megiddon. So the 7th mountain in Revelation 17 is a counterfeit Mount Zion. Now, the debate among Adventists is, where do you start counting the kingdoms? There's some Adventists, they start outside the book of Daniel with Egypt and Assyria, but this is not accurate, because we're told in Daniel chapter 2 that that's really the foundation, and it starts with Babylon, and then the book of Revelation ends with spiritual Babylon. So put it this way, your Babylons, your Neo-Babylon and spiritual Babylon are your 2 book ends. So you can, if you stay in between there, you'll stay on the correct interpretation. Now, the book of Daniel is the foundation for understanding this prophecy. Now, the reason many Adventists, they miss this, or it's been so confusing, is because we're missing something in Daniel chapter 11, especially verse 40. But also it includes the last 5 verses of Daniel chapter 11. But I'm going to show you, we're going to look at Daniel 11, verse 40, and show you how it unlocks the 7th king. Now, in Revelation 17, verses 10 through 11, it says, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is of the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition." So what does that mean? I remember reading that the first time. It was very confusing to me, but I'm going to show you how Daniel chapter 11 will unlock these verses. Now, Daniel 2 and Daniel chapter 7 is the foundation to understand this. So in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar was given a vision of all the kingdoms until the end of time, with the statue of different metals. The head of gold was Babylon. The chest and arms of silver was Medo-Persia. The belly and thighs of brass, that was Greece. The legs of iron, that was the Roman Empire. And then last was the feet and toes of iron and clay, which represented the last empire, the church and state system. So how many kingdoms did we just see there in Daniel chapter 2? Well, we saw 5 kingdoms. Now, this is very important because Revelation 17 says, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen." So we see 5 kingdoms in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. But in Revelation 17, it tells us there are 7, and this confuses people. And then it says, "And the 8th king is the same as the 7th." Okay, so the 7th king is also the 8th. So really there's 8 kings, but the 7th and 8th are the same person. And I'm going to explain the 8th king at the very end of the video. And by the time we get there, this will all should make sense. And it will bring all the puzzle pieces together when we get to the 8th king. Now, the concern in Revelation 17 is the seventh king who is ruling at the end of time for that short space. Now, that short space, that's also called the midnight hour that the 10 virgins go through. I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So for now, we're just looking at the identity of those 7 kings. So in Daniel 11, we're told that the 7th king at the end of time is the king of the north. There are 7 king of the north in the book of Daniel. So the first head, king or mountain on the beast is Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon. Let me read a verse about Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. It's Ezekiel 26:7. For thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will bring upon Tyrus Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, a king of kings from the north, with horses and with chariots and with horsemen and companies and much people. Okay, notice there that Nebuchadnezzar, he's the first king, but he's a king of the north. Okay, take note of that. Nebuchadnezzar is also a typology for the final king of the north in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3, he set up the image, he persecuted God's people. That's all a foreshadowing of what the 7th king is going to do, the 7th king of the north in Daniel 11:40, which we're going to look at. Now, the next king of the north and the second head on the beast is Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. And let's read a verse. This is Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 1, 3, and 9. It says, the word that the Lord spake against Babylon, for out of the north there cometh up a nation against her. For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north. Okay, so notice that Cyrus, King Cyrus, is also a king of the north. All right. Now the next king of the north in Daniel 11 is the kingdom of Greece, called the Seleucid dynasty. After Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was split to his 4 generals, Lysimachus, Cassandra, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Now, Lysimachus and Cassandra, they had their kingdoms absorbed by the Seleucid dynasty. And Daniel 11, it describes the Seleucid dynasty as another king of the north, which would be Greece. Now, Ptolemy, he dominated Egypt, and the book of Daniel chapter 11 calls him the king of the south. All right, and let's read a verse. This is Daniel 11:11. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. Okay, so the Seleucid dynasty was also called another king of the north, and that would be the kingdom of Greece. Okay, now for those who are unfamiliar with Daniel chapter 11, it's just covering all the prophecies found in the previous chapters of Daniel, but it's giving us more details. And it uses 2 main symbols, king of the south and king of the north, fighting for control of the world. And it describes the rise and fall of different empires from Daniel's time all the way to the end of time. The 4th mountain or king is the Roman Empire. And Daniel 11 refers to the Roman Empire as another king of the north. Okay, and we know it's Rome because it speaks about crucifying Jesus. Let's read that verse. This is Daniel chapter 11, verse 15 and 22. It says, so the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Now, the prince of the covenant, this is Jesus, and this king of the north was ruling when Jesus was crucified, so we know for sure that's the Roman Empire. Now, also, this is what you call a marker verse, because Daniel 11 it's a very complicated chapter, but this lets us know where we are right now. So we are in the Roman Empire. That means after this, not too long after this, the Roman Empire will fall, and there's going to be another empire that rises, and that's the Catholic papacy. So the 5th king of the north, or the 5th mountain, is the Roman Catholic papacy. Let's read a verse about them, or that system. It says, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and they shall take away the daily sacrifice, or the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Okay, now this king of the north, there's a lot we could say about that verse. We're going to keep moving though. This king of the north rules all the way till 1798, when the fifth king of the north is going to be wounded. Okay, and this is going to bring us down to what we call the time of the end, which is 1798. Now, the reason we only counted 5 kingdoms in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 is because there are really 3 stages of the feat of iron and clay. And this is something that many Adventists miss, and you really have to take all the prophecies into account to understand this. The first stage of the iron and clay was the papacy in the Dark Ages, okay? And that goes all the way to the time of the end. We are currently living in the wounded state of the papacy, which I'll show you in a few moments. And the second stage, or you could say application, the second stage or application of the feat of iron and clay is after the deadly wound is healed. Then there's a third stage, which we're going to talk about at the very end of the video when the stone actually hits the statue and it becomes a great mountain. Okay, we'll talk about that at the very end. Now, Daniel chapter 11, verse 40 through 45 is really the key to understanding the seventh king, and it brings all of the puzzle pieces together. And let's read that verse. This is Daniel 11:40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Okay, so at the time of the end, the king of the south pushes at the Catholic papacy. Right now, currently, the Catholic papacy is the king of the north, where we're at. It's the fifth kingdom. Now, to identify the king of the south, we really just need to ask the question, who pushed at the Catholic papacy towards the end of time? It's actually simple if you know history. So what it's referring to is during the French Revolution, which was an atheistic movement, Napoleon's general Berthier, he marched into Rome and he took the Pope into captivity in 1798. So that means that the time of the end, it began in 1798, and the power that pushed at the papacy was atheism, which means that the king of the south represents atheism, or you really could say anyone who is against the authority of the Bible or Jesus Christ. Okay, so currently there's a debate in the Adventist church. Some believe that the king of the south represents the Muslims and Turkey, but it would actually include anyone who is against the authority of Scripture and Jesus. So that would include atheists, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, any other religion that does not accept Jesus. They all fall under the banner of the king of the south. Now, the king of the south has been pushing since 1798. And there's going to be some more pushing that's going to happen as we go into the time of trouble. He's not done yet. But also, remember that this king of the south, he's not one of the king of the north. So he's not one of the kings or the heads of the beast in Revelation 17. He's only pushing. Okay, so we have to stay in line with the prophecy. Each one of these kings are a king of the north. Okay, so now in the next video, I will show you, and I got some other videos. It's going to show how the UFO phenomenon is connected to a major push, and it's connected with the king of the south and the time of trouble that we're about to go into. And then I'm going to show you in this video how the king of the north is going to respond. Revelation 17 says, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Okay, the was stage, that is the papacy in during the 1260. That is the Dark Ages. That is the fifth kingdom. The is not stage, that is the papacy during its wounded state. And then where it says yet is, that means is to come when the wound is going to be healed. Okay, Revelation 17:10 says it this way, a little differently. It says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay, now where it says 5 are fallen, that is the Dark Ages. That's what we saw in the statue of Daniel chapter 2. We are past that time when the deadly wound happened in 1798. Then where it says 1 is, This is the sixth kingdom or mountain or head in Revelation 17. This is represented by the papacy in its wounded state. That is where we currently are in prophetic history. Now, some Adventists teach that the deadly wound was already healed in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty. You could say that's a step in that direction. I've even said that in the past. But the deadly wound is not healed yet because the whole world is not wandering after the beast. The deadly wound is healed after the whirlwind in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, or Revelation 13, the fire from heaven. So we haven't gotten to that point in history. That is future. When the deadly wound is healed, you'll know because the seventh king will be ruling during that time, and that hasn't happened yet. Now, the sixth kingdom is the papacy ruling from behind the scenes. And then it says, the other is not yet come. That is the seventh king after the deadly wound is healed. Now, let me give you an example how we know that the papacy is also the sixth kingdom in its wounded state. All right. Remember when God punished Nebuchadnezzar and he went crazy like a wild beast? This was Daniel chapter 4. Babylon still continued to rule the world, even though Nebuchadnezzar was temporarily wounded or dethroned. Now, the same is for spiritual Babylon. The papacy has been wounded, but spiritual Babylon is still in control of the world. And I could show you many sources, and I say this because there's some people that put the United States right here. I could show you many sources that say that the Vatican still controls the world. They just do it from behind the scenes. And anyone who disagrees with that, I would encourage you to try to understand how much power the Jesuit order has. Like I said, many people, they try to place the United States as that sixth kingdom, but the United States is part of the seventh kingdom, the part of the threefold union that we're going to look at. That's Revelation 13. We haven't gotten to that point yet. The United States is being controlled by the Catholic Church from behind the scenes. If you get into all the secret societies and things that are going on, it will take you, all roads lead to Rome. Okay? So the Catholic Church is still in control, even though it is wounded. Now then the verse says, the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. That short space, that is the midnight hour that the 10 virgins go through. That is when all the major end time events happen, like the mark of the beast, the no buying or selling, the eventual death decree. And that's how we know that the deadly wound hasn't been healed yet. Also, some people say that short space, that's just the time when they say the United States is ruling, and then they're going to be the threefold union. That's not what it's talking about. The seventh king, when we get to the eighth king, this will make sense. But the seventh king is the one that's ruling when all the end time events happen. The short space, that is the midnight hour. It also says the 10 horns have power with the beast for 1 hour. That's the midnight hour. Now, let's move into the seventh king. This is Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. And I'm going to review everything at the very end if you're a little lost. Now, it says, Daniel 11, verse 40, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Okay, that's the papacy in its wounded state. That's the sixth kingdom. The next part of the verse describes how the wound is going to be healed. It says, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Okay, so in the second half of Daniel 11:40, it's going to describe the healing of the deadly wound, and we're going to start to see a transition take place in the verses through symbolic language of the power behind the papacy. Now, many Adventists miss this. I used to miss this when I studied these verses, but once you understand this, it brings so many other prophecies into the correct light. You'll understand other things that are going on in the Bible. Okay, the verse is starting to describe the power that is behind the papacy, and it does this through symbolic language. So my next question is, who is the power behind the Catholic papacy? Who is the one that gives him his seat and his authority? Revelation 13:2, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So Satan is the real power behind the Catholic papacy. So far, all of the kingdoms have been from the north, even the papacy in its wounded state. So I want you to show you something that Isaiah says about Satan. Okay, this is a famous chapter about Lucifer, Isaiah 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation on the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Notice that Lucifer, he wants to sit on the mount of the congregation. Just to show you, that's in Revelation 17 with the mountains, the Revelation 16, Armageddon, Mount Megiddo. He wants to sit on the mount of the congregation on the sides of the north. Okay, so why would Lucifer want to sit on the sides of the north? Well, the answer is simple. Is because the Bible tells us that Jesus is the true king of the north. Psalm 48:2, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Okay, Jesus is the true king of the north, but Satan wants to usurp that authority, and he wants to sit on the mount of the congregation as a false Christ. He's going to create a counterfeit Mount Zion. Now, while we're in Isaiah, I want to show you something else that is at the beginning of this chapter. It starts out talking about the king of Babylon. But then in the middle of the verses, it switches and it starts talking about the power behind the king of Babylon, which is Satan. It says, take up a proverb against the king of Babylon. Then it says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? Well, wait a second. I thought we were talking about the king of Babylon. Now, this has confused many theologians throughout history. Some theologians think this is only about the king of Babylon. But what happens here is God is lifting the curtain and he's showing us the power behind the king of Babylon, which is Satan. Okay, now, the same thing happens in Ezekiel chapter 28. This is another famous chapter about Satan. Listen to what it says. It says, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus. Well, then in the middle of the verses, it starts to describe the power behind the king of Tyre. It says, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Thou art the anointed cherub. Well, wait a second. I thought we were talking about the king of Tyre. The same thing happens. God starts out talking about the king of Tyre, but then in the middle of the verses, he switches and he starts to describe the power behind the king of Tyre. Now, why am I bringing this up? The reason is I'm trying to make a case here to help you understand what's going on in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. It starts out talking about the Catholic papacy as the king of the north, but then in the middle of the verses, a transition takes place through symbolic language, and it starts to describe the power behind the Catholic papacy, which is Satan, okay, and how he's going to appear as a false Christ. So let's look at this. Okay, so let's read that verse again. It's Daniel 11, verse 40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. So why does it say like a whirlwind? So that word, it actually has a lot of symbolic meaning. The word whirlwind is often used, not always, but many times it's used in the Old Testament for a symbol for the presence of God or the presence of Jesus. Now, there are some people in our church, and they believe that whirlwind just means like a whirlwind of activity or storm, like a troublesome time or something to do with war. Now, those are all applications, but the last part of Daniel 11 is highly symbolic, and you have to take into account the context of what we're talking about here. The context is found in Matthew 24. It's also found in Revelation 13. Matthew 24, Jesus talks about the false Christ. Revelation 13 talks about fire from heaven. Those last 5 verses in Daniel 11, 40 through 45 are describing the rise of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, the New World Order. So you have to take all of that into account. So in Matthew 24, when Jesus was asked, what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? the very first warning sign that Jesus gave, he said, many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Okay, the very first warning sign was about a false Christ. A few verses later, he says, all of these are the beginning of sorrows. Okay, Jesus mentions the false Christ 4 times, counting the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24. And he says, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Now, I have other videos about the abomination of desolation, how it points us to Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. It's revealing, Daniel 11, verse 40 is revealing a false Christ. And when Jesus said, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he was pointing us to the book of Daniel. Okay, and one of the major symbols to help us understand this is the whirlwind. So let's look at this, the word whirlwind. When Ezekiel saw his famous vision of God, it says, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north. Okay, so in the Bible, whirlwind and the north is connected to the presence of God, especially when it's mentioned together. Remember that Jesus is the true king of the north. So these are both symbols that are used here for the appearance of Jesus. If you keep reading in that chapter, verse 26, it says, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man above upon it. So what Ezekiel sees is the appearance of a man on a throne. So what he's seeing is Jesus Christ. And to get into that vision, it says, it uses the 2 symbols, the word whirlwind and the north, to represent symbols for Jesus Christ. Now, in the book of Job, the symbol of the whirlwind is used a lot. God speaks to Job out of a whirlwind. It says, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. It does that twice. And then, so the word whirlwind, it represents, especially here in Job, it represents a manifestation of God. God is speaking to Job from the whirlwind. That is his presence. Now, in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15, this is the last chapter of the book of Isaiah, and it's talking about the second coming of Jesus. And it describes Jesus coming like a whirlwind. Look at this. It says, for behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. Okay, so Jesus is coming to earth like a whirlwind. So the word whirlwind not only represents divine presence, but it also represents divine judgment. Now notice also, I just want to point out something there, that it says that Jesus comes with fire and his rebuke with flames of fire. Revelation 13 talks about fire from heaven, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Notice that the second word I highlighted here in green is chariots. Okay, now I highlighted that symbol because that is also a symbol that's used in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40. So let's go back and look at that. It says, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen. Okay, notice that this king of the north in Daniel 11, he's coming very similar to the way Isaiah just described Jesus Christ coming the second time. And the reason is because this king of the north in Daniel 11:40, it is a false Christ. This is the false Christ that Jesus was warning us about in Matthew 24. So the words, by the way, when Jesus comes the second time, it says he's coming with chariots. Is Jesus coming with literal chariots? Is that how Jesus is coming? No. Jesus, that's a symbol for something. When Jesus comes, he's coming with his angels. In Daniel 11:40, this is also symbols for something. Let's look at this. This is Psalm 68:17. It says, the chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. Okay, so chariots in the Bible is a symbol for God's angels, and it's used multiple times that way. Here's another one. When Elijah was taken up to heaven, it says he was taken up by chariots of fire and horses of fire. It says, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Okay, so the chariots of fire and the horses of fire that took Elijah up to heaven, those were angels. So when we're in Daniel 11:40, when the king of the north comes with his chariots and horsemen, these are symbols for angels, but Satan is not coming with the good angels. He's coming with evil angels that will be pretending to be good angels. So I want you to notice something else there, that there's the word whirlwind in this verse. And the reason is because what you have here with Elijah being taken up to heaven is a mini picture of the second coming when Jesus takes the righteous living to heaven. And that's the reason that word whirlwind is in there, because that's a type for what Jesus does at the end of time. Now, let's look at one more. Do y'all remember the story of Elijah and his servant when they were surrounded by the Syrian army? And Elijah's servant, he wakes up, he looks out, and he's like, oh no, we're surrounded by the army. And he says to Elijah, alas, my master, what shall we do? Elijah said, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elijah prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elijah. In that verse, those horses and chariots of fire, those were symbols for God's army of angels. Okay, so that is a symbol for angels. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, the chariots and horsemen is a symbol for fallen angels that are going to be pretending to be good angels. And yes, there are places in the Bible where it describes chariots and horses as just like part of somebody's army. But remember, when you're studying this, you have to take into context everything else that's going on in prophecy and we're with what Jesus said about a false Christ. So what's happening here is definitely something that is supernatural. Now, the last symbol that we're going to look at, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this symbol because I talk about it in other videos and we need to move a little bit quicker. The last symbol is Satan coming with many ships. Okay, so notice that Satan, this is important, he's coming with a threefold union of land, air, and sea. That threefold union, by the way, is repeated in the book of Revelation. The many ships means he's coming with a fleet of ships. So think about it this way. If I had a fleet of ships in the Gulf of Mexico, if I had a fleet of ships in the Gulf of America, then that means I control those waters, okay? Because I have my fleet of military ships out there. I control those waters where I have my fleet of ships. Now, if you look in prophecy, Revelation 17:15, it tells us that water represents peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So if Satan has a fleet of ships, that means he's controlling the waters. This is representing his military power and his influence over the world. The reason he has control over these people, he's going to be manipulating the people, is because of the miracles that he's working. He's coming with all of his angels. He's pretending to be Christ. Satan is going to counterfeit the second coming of Jesus, and it will be like nothing this earth has ever seen before. And because so many people do not even understand these verses, they're not going to be ready when this happens. Now, let me be clear. He can't imitate the second coming of Jesus perfectly, but he can do a pretty good job, especially if you think about non-Christians who don't even understand any of this, and many Christians who think they're going to be raptured away before these events happen. So this deception is going to deceive a whole bunch of people. So Daniel 11:40 through 45 is describing a counterfeit second coming. Let's summarize what we just saw here, okay? Remember that Jesus is the true king of the north. Okay, but Satan wants to be like the Most High, right? He wants to counterfeit the presence of God. We saw that the whirlwind represents the presence of God through symbols. We saw that chariots and horsemen is symbolic for God's angels. But in this case, this is talking about the evil angels that will be pretending to be good angels. We saw that many ships means he's coming with great authority and he's manipulating the people of earth. So Satan and his military force is going to deceive the whole world so much that the king of the south, which represents atheism, will be completely overthrown or completely wiped out. Okay, so think about that. Atheism or anyone who is against the Bible, Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, they're now going to follow this false Christ. And by the way, this is how the mark of the beast goes worldwide. It's going to take something supernatural. The people in China are not going to keep Sunday because the Pope said so. The Muslims are not going to keep Sunday just because the Pope says so. There's something supernatural that happens to make all of this go worldwide. You might be able to get people to follow Sunday laws in America, but you're not going to get it worldwide unless something else happens. So this is how we know, by the way, these miracles that are here and this symbolic language that's going on here, this is how we know this is more than just the Catholic papacy. It's the power that is behind the papacy, which is Satan. Okay, there's many people in our church, they believe the king of the north is just papacy, but it doesn't exclude the papacy. We're just talking about something more powerful that is behind the papacy. So think about it. The appearance of the Pope would not abolish atheism, because the Pope is already here, and that has not done that. So this is something supernatural. The King of the North, he's going to come with a threefold army of air, land, and sea. Now, where else do we see that threefold army? If you go to Revelation 13, you'll see the same threefold army. Okay, and what it's describing, this is the seventh king. Daniel 11:40 and Revelation 13, they go together. Okay, it's telling you the same exact thing. It's just giving you more information in Revelation 13. So you've got the false Christ, papacy, and America in Revelation 13. Revelation 13:1 is the sea beast, which is the papacy after the deadly wound is healed. And yes, there is an application, just like Daniel chapter 2, the feet of iron and clay has an application to the dark ages. But the primary application is after the deadly wound is healed. The same thing is for Revelation 13. The primary application is after the deadly wound is healed, when all the world is wandering after the beast. Then Revelation 13:11, you have the earth beast, the lamb-like beast, which is America, that represents your land power. And then Revelation 13 is the fire from heaven that matches the whirlwind of Daniel chapter 11. That is your air power. And remember that Satan, he's the prince of the power of the air. Okay, it is the whirlwind and the fire from heaven that's going to heal the deadly wound. And it brings all three powers together, right? Revelation 13 is describing three separate powers that are all going to rule together under the authority of Satan. And he is the last king of the north. Right, in Revelation 17, that seventh king is Satan, the false Christ, but it also includes the papacy and America. They're ruling together as the seventh king. Now, this is further explained in Revelation 16. It describes them this way. I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And then it describes their judgment. Their judgment, it says, and the great city, that's spiritual Babylon, was divided into three parts. And the cities of the nations fell. Okay, so at their judgment, they're divided up again. Now, they're going to be the seventh kingdom. Revelation 17, one more time, is papacy, America, and dragon, or you could say false Christ. Now, in Matthew 24, remember the disciples asked Jesus, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? The very first warning, he said, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Okay, 3 verses later, he says, all of these are the beginning of sorrows. So the false Christ was the very first warning sign that Jesus gave, letting us know, yeah, you're now entering into the time of trouble. I'll have more videos on Matthew 24. We'll explain more of that. Now, in Matthew 24, it also says, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Okay, notice how that matches Revelation 13:13. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. It's the same thing Jesus was talking about. Then if you go to Isaiah 66:15, which was talking about the second coming of Christ, it says that he comes like fire. For behold, the Lord will come with fire. The fire from heaven in Revelation 13 is a counterfeit Christ. Now, it also includes, there's going to be miracles and there's going to be false revivals. I'm not excluding that. I'm simply saying that there's also something more powerful that's going to be a counterfeit Christ. Jesus said, by the way, he also said there will be false Christs, plural. So I don't believe this is just going to be one false Christ. Satan will most likely set up what I call a decoy false Christ to make people think that the end time events have already occurred, and then he'll show up again as another false Christ and say, oh, that was the false Christ, I'm here to save you. So, and what Satan is doing at the end of time, he's using what we call fifth generation warfare, which really means psychological warfare. He's going to try to get people to believe that all the end time events are already happening. He's going to make prophecy be fulfilled in his way, but that's not what God is talking about. He's only trying to distract you, like the war in Israel. He's trying to get people to believe that that's the battle of Armageddon, when in reality, the battle of Armageddon is a spiritual battle. But that's how he's going to work. Now, back to Revelation 17, we'll conclude this way. It says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen. 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay, in Revelation 17, the 7th king is a false Christ, and he's going to rule for a short time. That short time, that is the midnight hour that the 10 virgins go through. In Revelation 12, it says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has but a short time. Now, then it says, it's Revelation 17, verse 12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. That 1 hour, that is the midnight hour that the 10 virgins go through. That's the short space or the short time. So this beast, it has 7 heads and 10 horns. Both numbers have a symbolic meaning in the Bible. The number 7 is the number for perfection and completion. That's God's number. And then the number 10, when I see the number 10 in the Bible, I think of the 10 commandments. So the number 10 can also represent the law. So the 7th head is a counterfeit Christ, and the 10 horns represent the governments who are going to be enforcing the counterfeit law. So the number 7 and 10 you could say this way, it represents church and state. Same as the woman that's riding the beast represents church and state. In this prophecy, God says things different ways. He's saying the same thing, but he's saying it in different ways. So Revelation 17, you have the 7th mount, the woman sitting on 7 mountains. There's many people that apply that to the Vatican, how it sits on 7 hills. You can apply that as an application. I think God uses that as a kind of like a foreshadowing or a typology. But the 7 mountains represent the 7 kingdoms throughout history. And the 7th mountain, she's sitting on the powers of all those mountains, the previous kingdoms that have come before her. And the 7th mountain is Mount Megiddo or Mount Mageddon, or Revelation 16 says Armageddon. Armageddon is a counterfeit Mount Zion. And this is all about, at the end of time, it's all about a counterfeit. All right, let's look at the 8th king. Okay, now this causes confusion, and it causes people to place the 8th king where the 7th king is supposed to be. So many people think the 8th king is the one doing all the end time events because they miss what the 7th king and the short space is really talking about. So what is the 8th king? It says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is of the 8th and is of the 7th and goeth into perdition. So the 8th king, like I said, it causes a lot of confusion among Adventists, but it's very simple. The 7th and 8th king are both Satan at different times. Okay, the 7th and 8th king, they both go into perdition. It's the same one. That's talking about the 1,000-year millennium when Satan is bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. It's also talking about Satan's ultimate destruction after the 1,000 years when he goes through his judgment. That's what the perdition is. It's actually both. So the seventh king, he goes into perdition, talking about the 1,000-year millennium. Satan is bound for 1,000 years. The great controversy says this: for 1,000 years, Satan will wander to and fro in the desolate earth to behold the results of his rebellion against the law of God. Then Revelation 20 says, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them to that battle of the number of whom is the sand of the sea. The eighth king is Satan after the 1,000-year millennium. Okay, now many our friends in other denominations, they believe that the 1,000-year millennium takes place on earth and that God's kingdom will be on earth during that time. That's not what it says. Jesus takes his people to heaven for 1,000 years, and Satan will be bound on the earth for 1,000 years. Now, the eighth king is Satan after the 1,000-year millennium, when God gathers the wicked, when Satan gathers the wicked for one last final battle against God, which is the battle of Gog and Magog. So let's look at that. Notice this is Ezekiel chapter 38, it's verse 15 and 16, and it's talking about the battle of Gog and Magog after the 1,000-year millennium. It says, and thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. The eighth king of the north is Satan after the 1,000 years, when Christ is going to return back to earth. He's going to raise the wicked for their judgment. Okay, so notice all of the kings have been king of the north, and that's how we know we've been on the right track the whole time. Now, this is why the Bible says, by the way, but the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Blessed and holy is he that has part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. Okay, the first resurrection, those are God's people. That's when Jesus, at the second coming, Jesus will resurrect the dead, and the righteous living will be caught up to meet him in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. That's when we are taken to heaven for 1,000 years. After the 1,000 years, Jesus will come back to earth. They will resurrect the wicked. And at this time, and they're resurrecting them, by the way, for their judgment, and the eighth king of the north is going to rally them for one last final attempt to overthrow God. In Revelation 17, it says, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. We explained that, but I also want to show you something here. That title is a parody of God. It's a word play on the title of God from Revelation 4:8, which says, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. Okay, this beast in Revelation 17 is really about a counterfeit of God's coming kingdom. Satan is going to come deceiving the whole world, trying to make them believe that he is setting up the 1,000-year millennium kingdom on earth. And he's trying to set up a counterfeit Mount Zion. That's why Isaiah said he wants to sit on the mount of the congregation on the sides of the north. He wants to be a king of the north. Now, remember what we said. The feat of iron and clay has 3 stages, or you even could say 3 applications. And just so you know, there's a few prophecies, or there's more than a few, that have multiple applications. And this causes confusion. I'm going to do a video or a sermon video called Applications. And we're going to look at all the different applications of these prophecies. The first stage of the feat of iron and clay is the Dark Ages. Okay, that was the 5th kingdom. The second stage is after the deadly wound is healed. Okay, when you have the threefold union, that is the 7th king. Okay, that's when all the end time events take place. The third stage is after the 1,000-year millennium, when Satan will, God resurrects the wicked. Satan will rally them to try to fight God. That's the third and final stage. Then the stone hits the statue and it becomes a great mountain. And that mountain is the kingdom of God. It's after the 1,000-year millennium that Jesus sets up his kingdom on earth, not during the 1,000-year millennium. And if you look online, all of the Christian or other denominations are teaching that Jesus sets up his 1,000-year millennium on earth. So what are they doing? They're actually paving the way for the false Christ. They're preaching what the false Christ wants them to preach. Let's review what we just saw here, the 7 kings in Revelation. This is the 7 kings, Revelation 17. They are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire. The 5th kingdom is the Roman Catholic papacy. The 6th kingdom is the papacy ruling in its wounded state from behind the scenes, secretly. Remember, we saw Daniel chapter 4 when Nebuchadnezzar was wounded. Babylon still controlled the world, even though he was wounded or dethroned. So the same as with spiritual Babylon. Anyone who would question that, I would just encourage you to look at the power of the Jesuit order. You know, it was Adam Weishaupt, and really right now it's secret societies that are really controlling things. If you look at the Jesuit Adam Weishaupt is the one who created the secret society called the Illuminati, which controls Freemasonry. What I'm saying is that all roads lead to Rome. The Jesuits are currently controlling America. Trump's cabinet is filled with Jesuits. Now, the 7th king is when America is involved. The 7th king is Satan as a threefold union of false Christ, papacy, and America. Okay, this is after the deadly wound is healed. And then the 8th king is Satan after the 1,000-year millennium with the final battle of Gog and Magog. Okay, so the 8th king, by the way, he's also a counterfeit Christ. In the Great Controversy, she says that after the wicked are raised from the dead, Satan represents himself to his deluded subjects as a redeemer, assuring them that his power has brought them forth from their graves. Okay, so the 8th king is also a counterfeit. He tells them that he's the one that resurrected them. We will revisit this prophecy of Revelation 17 in the future because there was a lot more stuff that we didn't get to talk about or cover. But I do want to encourage you to get ready. And you do that by surrendering your life to Christ because this 7th king, this false Christ, is about to be here. And you surrender your life by spending time in prayer, reading God's word, witnessing to others about the 3 angels' messages. Also pray and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal to you things that you need to change, and then pray and ask God to give you power to make those changes so you can be ready. Also, I just want to end with this. If you feel led to give to our ministry, it's very much appreciated. I was in school to be an SDA pastor. I've been in school since 2020. But I'm going to take a break to pursue independent ministry full time. School was consuming all of my time. It was stopping me from sharing the 3 angels' messages. And I get many comments on my videos. They say, well, why don't you make more videos? Or when are you going to make a video about this? And the answer is because I'm always working and I'm always going to school, which leaves no time to do anything else. And I see that we're going into the time of trouble, and I can't imagine being stuck in school doing homework that has nothing to do with these end time events. Nothing against the institutions themselves, although I would make lots of changes. I spent all this time. I was going into my senior year. I had great grades. I could graduate, but because I'm only allowed to take a few classes per semester, just 1 year, my senior year is going to take me 2 years. And I can't imagine being 2 more years in school while all these events are going on and not being able to preach the 3 angels' messages. So if I want to do independent ministry, if you feel led to donate, you can do that through Cash App, Venmo, or Zelle. Right now, we'll have probably more ways in the future, and we're working on a lot of stuff to get me and my wife to get this ministry up and running, and working on websites and things like that. So also, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it. That will also help support my ministry. And I just want to thank you very much for watching. I thank you for the support that I've been given. People ask me when more videos are coming. It is very much appreciated. Thank you so much, and God bless.